Dear students, in our previous classes, we have learnt about the chapter called Public Finance. In this chapter, we have learnt a concept called types of taxation in our previous class. Under the heading types of taxation, we have learnt progressive, regressive, proportional, and digressive taxes. So today's class, let us continue further in the same chapter called Public Finance. One more subheading what we have as Public Expenditure. I repeat, Public Expenditure. So under this subheading, we need to know meaning of the term public expenditure and its types. First of all, let us try to know meaning of the term public expenditure. Usually you may get this particular question for 2 marks. Like, what do you mean by public expenditure? Define the term public expenditure. Actually, the term public expenditure is self-explanatory. Observe, it means the expenditure incurred by the government. I repeat, expenditure incurred by the government. The government imposes taxes and earns revenue from other sources in order to finance its expenditure programs. In modern economies, that is, most of the economies nowadays, their main goal will be promotion of public expenditure, promotion of welfare state, thereby increase the public expenditure. However, these modern economies, the government incurs large amount of public expenditure in the sense that the role, responsibilities, or the duties of the government are increasing day by day, and the governments are planning to have number of populous programs for the welfare of the people. As a result, the amount of money incurred as expenditure by the government increases. However, public expenditure is classified into several groups or types. We have listed here 4 types. Observe: A. Developmental and non-developmental expenditure. B. Productive and unproductive expenditure. Direct and transfer expenditure. Revenue and capital expenditure. Sometimes you may get a question like this: what is public expenditure? How is public expenditure classified? That means you're going to write the types. Just you have to list. Or any one of this particular type, they may ask you to differentiate, like developmental, non-developmental, productive, unproductive, like that. So today, let us discuss these types in detail one by one. Observe carefully. First of all, we have developmental and non-developmental expenditure. The government involves in various developmental activities such as provision of health, education, training, distribution of electricity, expansion of transport communication, etc. In the sense that these are all the duties of the government, that is social responsibility, that is providing health, education, safe, pure drinking water, sanitation, such economic responsibilities like electricity, transport communication, and so on. The expenditure incurred for social and economic development of a country is called developmental expenditure. Focus on this word. The expenditure incurred on social and economic development of a country is called developmental expenditure. On the other hand, expenditure of the government in connection with its non-developmental activities, the very question only is there. In connection with its non-developmental activities is called non-developmental expenditure. For instance, defense expenditure, administrative expenditure, and so on. Because defense expenditure, in fact, it is grouped under non-developmental because it may not increase production. Administrative as well, expenditure as well. Come to second, productive and unproductive expenditure. That is, Productive expenditure is one which increases production of goods and services in an economy. Observe, any expenditure incurred by the government that increases production in an economy, so it is called as productive expenditure. Example, clear, irrigation increases agricultural output. Supposing if the government undertakes clear construction of a canal in order to promote irrigation facilities, then the provision of irrigation, no doubt, promotes agricultural output. Thereby, it increases the goods and services. See, analyze this statement very carefully. Any expenditure that increases the production of goods and services, it is called productive expenditure. Example, irrigation and agricultural output you have seen. Come to next slide. Whereas unproductive expenditure is one which does not increase output. So, unproductive expenditure is one which does not increases output. There, productive you said that it increases, unproductive it does not increase output. For example, subsidy to public sector enterprises, defense expenditure, and so on. So, a question arises, sir, just now in the other heading, under non-developmental you mentioned about this. Of course, unproductive, non-developmental. Of course, these two overlaps. Come to third one, direct and transfer expenditure. If the government spends a given amount for the purchasing a part of national output, it is called direct expenditure. Let us say some X amount is a national output. So that means government spends a given amount, some X amount it uses for purchasing a national output, it is called direct expenditure, purchase of defense goods, clear, or capital goods. Of late, you know that the government of India has purchased the defense requirements from France. Of course, that comes under the direct expenditure. That is, it has paid the amount well in advance. A part of amount it has paid for purchasing the national output, clear, then it is called direct. Example, purchase of defense goods or capital goods and so on. Whereas on the other hand, any government expenditure which does not correspond to any productive factor services is called transfer expenditure. I repeat, does not correspond any productive factor services. It is called transfer expenditure. Example, expenditure incurred on old age pension. You know that the government of India, even the state governments, are providing some amount of money as old age pension, unemployment allowances, sickness benefits. These are granted by the government under the social welfare programs. No doubt that that amount which the government transfers but does not correspond to any productive factor services, in the sense that the government pays them. In return, it cannot extract any clear work from them, or it cannot expect anything from them. Such we call it as transfer expenditure. Keep it in mind. Example you can give: old age pension, unemployment allowance, sickness benefit, and so on. Let us move on to the next one. What we have: plan and non-plan expenditure. Remember, whatever the expenditure incurred by the government to achieve the planned targets. For example, in India, you know that just 4 years after India's independence, in 1951, 5 year plans have been launched. And these 5 year plans set targets, plan priorities. So, to achieve those plan targets, clear, during a particular plan period, clear, some amount of money the government will incur as an expenditure, that you call it as plan expenditure. For example, assume in this 5 years period, if the government wants to expand education facilities, thereby achieve clear literacy rate, let us say from 75% to 85, or 85 to 95, and so on, it will set the targets. So to achieve those targets, no doubt that the government has to incur some amount of money as expenditure by expanding the school buildings, providing human resources for the school, physical capital, and so on. So whatever the expenditure incurred by the government to achieve plan targets in a particular period, we call it as plan expenditure. Example, implementation of National Rural Health Mission. I repeat, implementation of NRHM stands for National Rural Health Mission during the 10th 5-year plan. Let us move on to second, non-plan. Non-plan expenditure includes those expenditures which are incurred in the ongoing plan schemes. This word ongoing plan schemes, you have to keep it in mind. For example, a railway bridge or a college building constructed during the particular plan period. Let us say 10th 5-year plan. Come to point number 5, that is revenue and capital expenditure. Remember this last one, what we have, revenue and capital expenditure, is the most important one. Analyze this last point very carefully. You can expect this particular question. Very important one. Focus much. The expenditure which does not result in creation of assets is treated as clear revenue expenditure. For example, assume the government is going to incur some X amount as an expenditure. From that expenditure, no asset is created. If no asset is created, then it is called revenue expenditure. This expenditure is incurred for the normal functioning of clear the government departments and other services, interest charges on debt, etc. I think you know the meaning of the word debt, DEBT, B is silent. The word debt stands for loan. You know that the government borrows money, you call it as public debt. When the government borrows money from the others, clear, of course, it has to pay interest. So, interest paid by the government is a public expenditure, but it's not creating any asset. Same way, government departments, there are so many departments which are working under the government. Let us say education department, finance department, transport, health, education, and so on. For each and every department, the government has to spend money. So, such money spent by the government, clear for different departments, for the normal functioning of the government departments or interest charges paid, clear will be included under revenue expenditure because they will not create any clear assets as such. Then, the revenue expenditure of the central government is normally divided into three parts, broadly divided into three parts. What are they? Civil, defense, grant in aid. It is very important to know all these three terms. Civil expenditure means it's an expenditure incurred on organs of state, fiscal services, interest payments, administrative services, and even services related to agriculture, industry, postal services, etc. That means all the departments which are working, clear, services related to agriculture, industry, postal department, etc. Administrative services. When I say organs of the government, you know that organs include legislature, executive, and judicial organs of the government. Whereas defense expenditure, the very term is self-explanatory. It's an expenditure incurred on the purchase of arms and ammunitions. Let us say salary to the armed forces, defense. Grant in aid, this is very, very important. Remember, grant in aid include the help given by a particular country to another country on humanitarian grounds. There is no need to or there is no obligation to repay it back. Let us say if a neighboring country like Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or even Pakistan for that matter, the government may decide to assist that country at times of natural calamities like let us say earthquake or let us say floods and so on. So, grant in aid means it's just given assistance, that's it. But it will not clear, it will not be paid back. There's no obligation to pay it back. Observe, it includes assistance given by the government, clear, assistance given by the government to the states, UTs, when I say UTs, Union Territories, assistance to neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, etc. And here's a spell error, please be very careful. It should be to. That is assistance given by the government to the states. It is TO2. Clear? To the states or UTs, assistance to the neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, etc. Come to second main point, capital expenditure. It means expenditure of the government that leads to the creation of capital stock. Just the only difference. Revenue expenditure is an expenditure incurred by the government which will not create any what you call asset. But capital expenditure, it leads to the creation of capital stock in an economy. It consists of expenditure on acquisition of assets like land, building, machinery, equipments, investments in shares, loans, advances granted by central government to states, UTs, government corporations, etc. See here, let us say if the government purchases an asset like equipment or a machinery from XYZ country, it pays money, that's an expenditure, but it will create a stock. So any such government expenditure which creates a capital stock, you can group under capital expenditure. Clear? So today's class we have learned about meaning of the term public expenditure and the types. Though we have learned different types of public expenditure, please focus much on the last one, revenue expenditure and capital expenditure, because that is very often asked in the examination. Focus much of your attention on that. Still, we have one more heading. What we have as causes for increasing public expenditure. See, nowadays, the role of the government is clear, increasing. Activities of the government are increasing. Expectations of the people are increasing. So, obviously, expenditure should increase, it will increase. Next class, let us learn what are the reasons for such increase in public expenditure. Thank you.